Greetings, happy warriors, and welcome to the Rabbi Daniel Lapin Show, where I, your rabbi, reveals how the world really works. Thanks for being part of the show, and thank you for all that you do to help promote the show. Your kind efforts in letting people know about the show and sharing it with people who might be like-minded is bearing fruit, and I see it and I appreciate it. I also want to ask you, if you haven't already subscribed, please go ahead and do that, as I think almost everybody knows that in the internet world today, subscribers are very valuable, and numbers really matter. So thank you for doing that as well. And what we're going to do today is talk to somebody who was arrested and incarcerated, somebody who went to prison because of the Biden Justice Department's prosecution of January the 6th, 2024, people who, back in 2020, that it's pretty serious stuff. We will hear from an individual who actually had the FBI smashing his door at 6 a.m. one morning because he had been identified as being part of the crowd at the Capitol on January the 6th. So he's going to tell us a whole lot about that, and you'll probably find it as fascinating as I did. He's remarkably good-natured for what he went through, and in a certain sense, it was also rather a funny interview, I thought, just because of the way he took the whole thing. So appreciate that very much indeed. And also to let you know that our Happy Warriors community has access not only to a special website where Happy Warriors connect and communicate with each other and with myself and with my wife, but you also have access to a special private podcast that I tape exclusively for you, material that I'm less enthusiastic about having available out in public. So if you're not yet a member of the Happy Warrior community, right now wouldn't be a bad idea to look into it, because there is a sale on for membership, and it can be obtained at extremely reasonable terms. So give that a shot. We'd love to have you involved, and there are real benefits to being part of a community of happy warriors, a community of people who are trying to achieve exactly what you're trying to achieve in your life, and having people to connect with and collaborate with is very, very helpful. I also want to tell you that I'm going to be making an appearance at a gun store in Florida near Fort Lauderdale Airport on the afternoon and evening of May 29. So it's a couple of weeks from the time I'm recording this show right now, middle of May, but towards the end of May, Thursday evening, May the 29th, at a store that is just about a mile south of Fort Lauderdale Airport. It's in Davie, Florida. And it's called The Smoking Gun. You know why? Because they have a cigar lounge, smoking, and it's one of the premier gun shops in the state of Florida. And they also serve coffee and pastries and things like that. So it's kind of a private. It's almost as if it's your own club. Does it appeal more to men than to women? Probably, but they do sell, and the proprietor tells me they sell many, many guns to women in the Florida area. So if you are interested, it's called The Smoking Gun, and it's Thursday evening. I will be there. I'll be signing books, and we'll be having a conversation about why the latest book is called The Holistic You, why I wrote it. We'll also be talking about how you can also benefit from writing your own book. It's easier than ever to be able to write your book, and there are reasons, very, very good reasons, having to do with business and family for you to be writing and putting down something in book form at the present time. We'll be talking all about that on Thursday night, May 29, at the Smoking Gun on Sterling Road in Davie, Florida. Hope to see you there. If you're anywhere near the neighborhood, do drop in. It'd be great to see you. And that then I spoke about joining the community, and I think there are benefits in that. And so I spoke about my appearance in Florida. And finally, I also want to mention that a number of people have tried out the program, the resource on the website at rabbidaniellapin.com, and that would be the scrolling through Scripture. And if you've ever wondered why it is that, we just observed the holiday of Passover a few weeks ago, and I calculated how many million families went through the ritual of the Seder experience. Why? Because a little over 3,300 years ago, the Israelites went out of the land of Egypt and began their existence as a nation, picking up the Torah, picking up Scripture at the foot of Mount Sinai en route to the Promised Land, even though it was a 40-year journey. But if you've ever wondered why it is that this book continues to exert so much influence, not only on Jews, who over 3,000 years later still follow its rules, to this day, to this very day, if you walk into a restaurant, if you're visiting Israel, you walk into a restaurant, the odds are that it is a restaurant that adheres to the dietary regulations of the Old Testament, that it serves exclusively kosher food. My goodness, do you know if you visit Dubai, and you might well do it because one of the best ways to visit Israel is on one of the Gulf States airlines, approaching Israel from the east. And it's always fascinating because there's a lot of business travel between India and Dubai or Abu Dhabi. But you go to Dubai and there's a bunch of kosher restaurants today. Would you believe this? I mean, it's quite extraordinary. Obviously, the Abraham Accords of the first Trump administration had a lot to do with it, but also the fact that there's now today an enormous amount of business interaction between Israel and Dubai. So you've got kosher restaurants in Dubai. Israel, your odds are that wherever you eat, you're going to be eating kosher food. And again, you know, why? Because the 3,300-year-old book said, don't mix dairy foods with meat foods. And so if you want cream in your coffee at the end of a meal of having a terrific steak, in Israel, you will be given non-dairy creamer. That's just how it's going to be. And you'll ask them for regular real cream, they'll explain to you. This restaurant adheres to the kosher regulations. This happens to be a meat restaurant. There are other restaurants that are dairy restaurants, but never shall the two meet up. So if you've ever wondered why that is, why it is that if you spend a Shabbat, if you are in an Israeli hotel over Friday night and Saturday, you're going to notice that at the elevator bank, at least half the elevators are going to be operating on what's called Shabbat mode, because Jews are not allowed to press the elevator buttons on Saturday, activating electrical circuits. And so the way it works is that the elevator is switched onto an auto mode, so it just stops at every floor on the way up, and then when it hits the top, it goes all the way down to the basement, and then starts it step by step all the way up. And so again, the point is that this 3,300-year-old book is far from irrelevant. It regulates and influences the lives of millions of Jews and hundreds of millions of Christians. And so if you ever wondered a little bit more about, because as you read it, it seems to be a collection of stories and legends about long forgotten people. Why is this so influential? And the answer is that embedded in the Hebrew text, and Hebrew is what one of the one of the pilgrims who arrived on the Mayflower, Sir William Bradford, in his History of the Plymouth Plantation, called the language, the Lord's language, in which the Lord spoke to the patriarchs of old. Embedded within the Hebrew, and I know you don't read Hebrew, but it doesn't matter, because we've got a program available on our website at rabbidaniellapin.com called Scrolling Through Scripture. I think it's possibly the work of mine of which I am most proud, because it gives access to everybody, regardless of background, to the amazing, mind-boggling secrets that compel the conclusion that, wait a sec, you know what? This was not compiled by a literary team of Bedouins. This actually is not only profound, but it contains information that simply wasn't available at the time it makes its appearance in the world just over 3,000 years ago. So if you're interested in investing a little time and a little money in trying to get the hang of what is it that makes this book so special, why is this the most influential book in all of Western civilization, then you should take a look at a free half-hour video program available on rabbidaniellapin.com, and you're just looking for something called Scrolling Through Scripture, and you can go ahead and begin to get a flavor for why it is that this is such a compelling volume and such an influential book in all of Western civilization. So with all of that, let's go ahead and start talking to my guest, who went through extraordinarily harrowing ordeals, but which he really took enormously philosophically, and I found it a very, very interesting conversation. So please go ahead and do that, and at the end I'll be back to say goodbye to you. So with us now being ready to move on, here is my guest for today's show.
Welcome, everybody, and this is Elliot Resnick, a friend, and we met, Elliot, I think when we met, you were editing the famous American Jewish weekly, The Jewish Press. Am I right?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I also know I met you at the CPAC weekend in Washington, D.C., but you are right. I was at the Jewish Press, and I interviewed you around 15 years ago now, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Now, so I mean, and thank you. It was more than once. The Jewish Press was very kind to me, and I came out well there. But then you also interviewed me for a book you wrote.
Well, yes. So that book was the same. It's really a collection of my interviews. And I interviewed you about, I believe, your economic books, and also I asked you about homeschooling also, because I was very interested in that particular topic. And you were kind enough to give me a blurb for one of my later interview books. But I really appreciated some of what you had told me in that interview about the value of creating products for other people. That, the left always thinks that, to create goods, you're being selfish. You want just money. And you wisely pointed out that to make money, you need to create products that other people actually need and want. And we should be encouraging people to create products that people need and want. And so therefore, capitalism is a great thing for humanity, not a bad thing.
And not only that, but also moral and part of God's original plan. But the only exceptions to that rule, that the only way to get money is by making other children of God happy, giving them the things they want. The only two exceptions are people who go into 7-Elevens with 357 Magnum revolvers and they discover there's another way of getting money. And then, of course, there's the government that also uses force through the IRS to extract your money, and it's also part of a con as well, a con game, because they manage to persuade you that you're being somehow virtuous by allowing your money to be extracted. You know, it's like the 7-Eleven convenience store clerk thanking the guy who emptied his cash register at the point of a gun. But Elliot, I don't know if you mind revisiting this or not. I hope you don't. But speaking of the government, if I use the word government and Elliot Resnick is in the interview with me, I'm afraid that anybody who knows you, and I do, our minds immediately spring to January the 6th.
Yes. Well, I am a conservative, so normally I do believe in following law and order and doing what's right and standing properly on line, not cutting the line, not playing loose and fancy with the rules. But there always comes a time where right and wrong always should matter more than legal and illegal. I was just reading Henry David Thoreau's famous On Civil Disobedience essay last night for the second or third time. And he says, look, we're human beings. We're not monkeys or horses. We have brains. And if we think the government is doing something which is immoral, then we are obligated as people who have brains to do what's right, regardless of whether the government thinks it's correct or not. And so on January the 6th, I went to Washington because I thought the election was either being stolen or at the very least there were tremendous questions about the election that were not being addressed. And I thought it was imperative that the political class address these questions. And when they refused to address these questions, and I was part of a crowd, we saw an opportunity to enter the building to impress upon the politicians how important it was to address these questions. I took that opportunity and I went inside that building, the Capitol, namely.
At the time, did it feel as if you were participating in a revolution, or as they like to call it, an insurrection? Is that what it felt like to you?
No, that's a joke. Everyone knew it was a joke. That's why so many January 6th protesters actually went home that night and posted pictures of themselves on their social media accounts because they didn't really think they had done anything wrong. It was a protest. We went inside the building, the Capitol building, to tell the politicians how upset we were. That's all it was. And, if you compare it to the leftist protests during the summer of 2020, they were upset that someone in Minnesota had either been killed or died. And therefore what? Therefore they stole sneakers from stores in Manhattan. What's the connection? Why are you burning, looting, and murdering all around the country because you're upset about one police incident in Minnesota? What we did was a one-to-one correspondence. We were upset at particular politicians, and we went into the building in which these politicians were situated to scream and protest at these politicians. We didn't do anything more than that. Not one painting was touched or damaged. Not one statue was broken. Had the left been in that building, the building would have been on fire. But we did not go inside the building to destroy it. We went inside it to save it.
So, as a matter of fact, in Seattle and Portland, Oregon, are two places that I'm aware of. There were other places as well where the crowds that summer of 2020, to which you allude, burst their way into government buildings and indeed put them to the torch, set them on fire, and did extensive damage. As far as I know, nothing was done. There was no legal retribution against those people who did that in Seattle and Portland. When you went in, were you at any point aware, did you force your way into a door, or did you force your way past guards trying to keep you out? What did it seem like to you?
Right. So there were, I think, at least 2 or 3 break-ins, and people don't really know this. Because often people will say, oh, all the protesters went through open doors. And there were, I think, several hundred who did go through open doors. I was not one of them. I went inside the building on the eastern side, and we had to, I guess you could say, break our way inside the building. I mean, eventually, actually, the door was open from the inside, but there was an attempt made for around 10 or 15 minutes to actually break inside the building. There were only around maybe 10 or 15 guards facing a crowd of several hundred. So it wasn't like we really needed to do very much. When you have that many people, all you need to do is keep on inching forward, and the force of the crowd simply overruns the policemen. You don't have to physically use your hands to push anybody. You just keep having to move forward. So the people on my side of the building, on the eastern side, we did indeed, you could say, storm the Capitol and broke into the Capitol. Yes, so on my side, that is true.
And the feeling that you had, and the feeling among those people around you, was one of elation or trepidation?
No, I mean, I was watching the videos of what happened recently, because even though I was there, sometimes you need a little reminder. People were screaming USA, or let us in, or stop the steal, or whose house, our house. This wasn't a revolutionary crowd. This was a crowd of people carrying American flags, people who would die and do die for the country. These are the people who enter the army, the police force, the fire force. These are the most patriotic Americans, and we simply wanted our voices to be heard, not more than that.
So how long were you in the Capitol building, and when and why did you leave?
I was inside for roughly 45 minutes. I wanted to, like I said, really, I wanted to get to the chambers. I thought it would be glorious if we could have hundreds or even thousands of people protesting in the chamber of Congress, and that itself might have, that just like the left used the chaos in 2020 to their advantage. They said, look, maybe we don't agree with the violence, but there's so much racism in this country that we understand why the people exploded, and we'll tell them to calm down, but first you really need to address the racism problem in this country. I thought the Republicans should have done the same with the chaos that we created. We could have created, and we did create, enough chaos, and they could have said to the Democrats, look, we might not agree with what happened today, but we've been begging you for answers for 2 months, and we'll tell them to calm down, but first you need to give us an audit. Because until you give us an audit, we understand why they exploded, and we understand why they came inside, and we can't tell them to calm down until you give us something. So that's what I was hoping would have happened, and eventually I saw that did not happen. When I went inside the building, I was hoping more and more people would come inside, but there was a significant number of law enforcement officials inside the building. I was not aware of that. I thought as soon as we would be inside the building, we would immediately be able to get to the chambers. That was not true, and increasingly, instead of us advancing further and further to the chambers, the law enforcement officials were actually making progress and pushing us back and further back towards the entrance again. So once I realized definitively that there was no way that we were going to get to the chambers, that's when I left the building.
And at that point, you just went home?
I stayed around for a little bit longer because, first of all, I thought Trump might come because people said Trump had said he might join us there. But then, I had no reason to rush home. I had a bus that night around 8 or 9 o'clock. So I just sort of took in the scene, I guess you could say. I observed the western side. That's where people were struggling in the tunnel. I sort of stood there. That's where Biden was later took the oath of office. So I was thinking of actually standing in that same exact spot, but it would have taken too much pushing for me to get there. But I left eventually because it was just very, very cold. So I stood around for maybe an hour or so, and then I actually went to the Thomas Jefferson Memorial. I thought he would be a very good person to visit after a day like that. I got there, I think, 45 minutes later to learn that it was closed for renovations. And I was thinking of actually jumping over the fence to visit him anyways. But I thought to myself, I've done enough law breaking for one day. And so even though there was no one around and no cameras, and I would not have gotten into trouble, I said to myself, you know what, better not. And so I did not visit him, and I went home.
Up till this point, that afternoon, you're feeling this was no great things achieved, no big harm done, and there it is, and you're done, you're heading home.
Right, indeed. It didn't occur to me that I would get into trouble, especially after that whole summer of riots. And by the way, that was going on in the back of my mind, and I'm convinced till today, if the summer of riots of 2020 did not happen, January 6th did not happen. But because those 2020 riots happened and because the government barely reacted to them, the people got the impression that, you know what, if you're really upset about something, there are new rules in town. You could get a little bit rowdy, it's okay. And so I thought in the back of my head, I remember a little voice saying, now it's our turn. Because they had set the rules. New rules. You could do if you're upset, you could, cut some corners. And so I thought, okay, no big deal.
the fact that you were not breaking into stores and looting is a point in your favor.
Yes, exactly. We were not burning, we were not looting, we were not murdering. We were just breaking into a building, which in the grand scheme of things is not a big deal.
So now take me to the very first moment when you became aware that something big was happening and you were in peril.
Well, I think it took a day or so. First, I think the Republican and conservative reaction to that day only set the stage, because had there been some pushback from Republicans or conservatives, I don't know if the Democrats would have gone after us with as much strength as they did. But because the conservatives and Republicans immediately threw us under the bus, including, I hate to say, including President Trump, after his initial reaction was fine, but by the next night he already said that what we had done was a heinous crime. That's literally what he said. And so I realized we were in trouble when I started seeing reports on Twitter of people who were being stopped in the airports. When I was going to Brooklyn that Friday for the Sabbath, I saw a sign on the West Side Highway, a huge ad, a bulletin board, asking the public for help in identifying anyone who was in the Capitol on January 6th, and to please call the FBI if you know anyone who was in the Capitol that day. Now, mind you, again, that whole summer of riots, I did not see a single FBI bulletin or billboard. But for January 6th, the FBI was advertising on the West Side Highway. And you can imagine there weren't exactly that many people from Manhattan who went to the Capitol on January 6th. But they were advertising in Manhattan anyways. So I knew when I saw that, when I saw Trump not taking our side, but taking the other side, and I started seeing some reports of people being arrested, I knew that perhaps I might be in trouble.
And when did that concern become confirmed?
Well, Politico wrote an article about me in April of 2021, so that was 3 months later.
So for 3 months, your life was not impacted?
No, not at all.
And so Politico does an article featuring you?
Correct. And yet, so I lost my job over that a month later. The Jewish press let me go in May because they were scared of losing some government advertising, so they let me go. And I was not arrested until March of 2023. So 26 months after January 6th is when I was arrested.
And was this anticipated? Were you phoned, or was there a knock at the door?
There was a knock at the door at 6 o'clock in the morning, the loudest pounding I've ever heard in my life. Bang, bang, FBI, open up, open up. Well, I opened up.
Did you already know what it was, or were you for a moment disoriented?
I was not disoriented. I had seen a story on Breitbart around a month or two earlier about a judge who had told two January 6 attorneys that he would be retiring soon because the Justice Department had told him that they would be arresting 1,000 more January 6 protesters, and the judge told the lawyers he had no interest in spending the rest of his career dealing with January 6 cases. So when I read that story, I was hoping it was not true, but I said to myself, if it is true, I probably will be among those 1,000 new people who are arrested.
Any idea of how they found you?
Well, first of all, I am on video. There happens to be a person who hates me because he's a homosexual activist. And even though I was once friendly with him once upon a time, he takes glee in trying to harm me every moment that he can. He tried to get me fired from the Jewish press numerous times. When I was sentenced in Washington, D.C., he actually came to my sentencing, which I find absolutely remarkable. I mean, I don't know anyone in this world that I detest so much that I would go to his hearing to see him being sentenced and thrown to jail. But he did come to my sentencing. So I believe he also turned me in because the FBI report says somebody identified me who knows me from years ago, and I can't imagine who else it would be besides him. But I also happened to be on video, and there were vicious leftists who were spending all their time, all day, all week, just going through videos of January 6th and using facial recognition software to identify every single person. And so they would have found me, I think, either way.
So back to the morning, 6 a.m., banging on the door. You open the door, and what happens?
Well, I immediately raised my hands because, I don't want to mess with these people, and the door slammed in their face because the door opens and doors automatically shut if no one opens them, so it shut in their face. And then I well, to make a long story short, they brought me down to downtown Manhattan. They brought me in front of a judge. They had a statement of facts in front of the judge. They asked the judge if they could fix a typo. They said, we don't presume to know the defendant's pronouns, but we believe he goes by he and him. And in one of the paragraphs here, it says she. So we asked the judge's permission to please change it to he. And I thought everyone would break out into laughter, but no one broke out into laughter. Everyone was very serious about that. Anyways, I went home that night, and I was sentenced.
They kept you all day.
They kept me all day. They were very nice to me, actually, but after that initial banging and arrest, they were nice to me, which was bizarre, but they were.
Did they gave you time to get dressed and get ready to leave with them?
Yes. Like I said, it was very strange. They were very respectful of my religious needs also. My yarmulke, the kippah that I wear on top of my head, it fell off at a certain point. I asked them to please put it back on my head. They said, Mr. Resnick, do we have your permission to touch the yarmulke? So they were very respectful of my religious needs.
Were you handcuffed?
I was handcuffed. Yes.
Amazing. And so you're down at the court all day, and then finally they release you in the evening.
Correct. And and then I was sentenced 18 months later. Which, I learned something about court cases, which is whenever you hear somebody being sentenced to a half a year or a year or 5 years, you always have to add another year or 2 years to that sentence, because as soon as you're arrested, your life is in limbo. You can't really do anything. Often you lose your job. In my case, I couldn't look for a new job. And so my life was in limbo for around a year and a half until I was finally sent to jail in September of 2024.
And so what happens then? They sent you a note saying you've got to show up at court on such a date.
Yes, I was in touch through my lawyer, usually. And because the Republicans and conservatives had no interest in defending people like me, I decided right away there was no point in me trying to make a hero of myself and defend myself in court and say, yes, I did this for ideological reasons, and I think what we did is correct. There was no point in me doing that because no one would have even reported what I said in the courtroom. Right. So I really basically behaved myself. All these cases were in Washington, D.C. Many lawyers asked for the cases to be moved to a more neutral setting, but every single judge denied that motion. So there was zero chance of me getting, a fair trial or a trial where some jury member might say, you know what, this might be the law, but I'm going to vote not guilty anyways because I think he did the right thing, which you're allowed to do, by the way. People don't know that, but you are, as a juror, always allowed to say not guilty no matter what the law says, because a jury is supposed to be a jury of your peers. You're judging your neighbor. And if you think your neighbor does not deserve to go to jail, it really does not matter what the law says. You are allowed to vote not guilty. There was a famous case in 1736 where a New York jury said about a New York newspaper publisher not guilty for libeling the British government. And he clearly had libeled the British government, but they didn't quite care because they hated the British government anyways. And so you are allowed to do that. But there was no chance of me getting a juror like that in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. voted, I believe, 92% for Biden and 4% for Trump. So there was no chance in the world I was going to get a Republican who would have voted not guilty. So I just pled guilty. I played by the rules. I pled guilty to civil disorder, and eventually I was given a sentence of 4 months in prison, 4 months home detention, 12 months probation, and $10,000 in fines. Yeah.
And so from there straight to jail, or you were given a date to turn yourself in?
Well, I was sentenced shortly before the Jewish holidays and the high holidays, so I asked if we could delay my sentencing till after, at the very least, Yom Kippur, but possibly even after Sukkot. And thank God the judge said, no, it's fine, we can wait till after all the holidays. And so I went into jail, I believe, on election days. I went to jail election day, or prison, rather. I voted
5.
Yes, November 5th. I voted in the morning and reported to prison in the afternoon.
My goodness. And so by this point, your life's been in limbo for a year and a half.
Correct.
No career prospects, no looking for a job, and I'm presuming no dating.
Well, here and there, you'd be surprised. I went out with a girl from Israel, and she said, "Oh, I grew up on a settlement. In my settlement, people get arrested all the time." So,
a match made in heaven.
I almost. But there were other problems. Unfortunately, it did not work out. But no, it does harm. I guess it possibly does harm your dating career to a certain extent. And I had my podcast during that time, but on my podcast, I had to be careful what I said, what I did not say. There's somebody I wanted to interview. He's called the Spider-Man for Life. He climbs buildings without rope to draw attention to all the abortions taking place in this country. He's a very religious Christian. Mason Deschamps, I believe his name is. But I could not interview him during that time period because he's technically breaking the law when he climbs those buildings without rope. So I had to be careful who I interviewed. Also, I couldn't be as vocal on social media. So even the podcast, I cannot really do as much as I wanted to do because of my arrest.
Does he still do that, by the way?
Yes, I believe he's on probation in Arizona, but I think his probation is ending. So I imagine he will be climbing another building soon.
Please put me in touch with him when you have a chance.
Sure, it would be my pleasure to do that.
Wouldn't he be interesting for me to interview?
I believe so. I mean, I was very comfortable with this. I don't know how. I believe. Well, for my audience, I think it's a little bit more of a mixed audience than yours. I have some very religious Jews in my podcast audience, and this person. Okay, well, he's a very religious Christian, and he will talk about Jesus very often, which I think is wonderful. But
I want to hear more about climbing.
Okay, but sure. He is interesting. He's very idealistic. I think he's a great person.
Good. All right. Well, we'll definitely get to him. So, Elliot, so that afternoon, November the 5th, you vote in the morning, and you turn yourself in the afternoon. What is that experience like? What happens?
Well, it's not as bad. I mean, I went to a low security prison, and I think low security prisons is a very different experience than a high security prison. Now, mind you, any prison, when you get there, you go through the standard, you could call it dehumanizing, but I guess it's necessary. You know, they have to make sure there's no contraband on you. So you are removing all of your clothes, and they are at least quickly looking to make sure you're not hiding anything in any part of your body. So that's obviously not pleasant. But overall, I was in a low security prison, which means there are no gang wars there. There are no stabbings there. I spoke to another person in prison who was in MDC, Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. And he told me he would rather spend 1 year in Danbury, Connecticut, which is where I was, than 1 week in MDC in Brooklyn. That's how different the different type of prisons are. Someone told me he was in a prison for, I think, 8 months, and there were 6 stabbings in that prison when he was there. So I was, thank God, did not experience any of that. No gang wars, no gang violence.
The major risk for you was being bored to death by an accountant.
Correct. So I basically played sports and read books all day long. I was in prison for 77 days. I read 52 books. So I, to a certain extent,
What interaction did you have with other people in the same facility?
You know, in many ways, it's like the type of interactions you have with your friends or fellow campmates in school or in camp, because you're eating meals together 3 times a day in a lunchroom. You're playing sports together. You're sleeping in the same rooms together. So you make friends the same way you made friends when you're a kid in camp and school.
Then, probably the next day, your first full day there, you probably heard that President Trump was now elected.
Yes, well, I actually watched the election returns on the prison TV that night, although unfortunately you have to buy headphones or a radio to actually hear the audio. So I didn't hear the audio, but I could see the screen, and I could see, you know, all the graphics on the screen. So I stayed up till he won, until he actually started delivering his speech. So I knew he won right away, yes.
Did you already at that point feel fairly confident that he was going to change your life?
Meaning he was going to pardon me, you're asking?
Yes.
You're asking? No, not necessarily, because he was giving mixed signals, I would say, about whether he was going to pardon. Mm-hmm. Some people, everybody, I wasn't sure if what I did qualified as a violent offense or not, meaning you or I would never call what I did violent, but I did hold a policeman's wrist for 2.5 seconds. He was pepper spraying somebody in front of me. So I held his wrist. And that, at least legally, might qualify as a violent act. So I wasn't sure if he would pardon me or not. Yes. So I just wasn't sure.
Yeah. Elliot, did the mood of your jailers change at all after the election?
Well, I wasn't there before the election. I was only there after the election. I mean, but also I was very careful not to discuss politics with the jailers, because you don't know what their politics are, and they might not even know why you're there. I mean, when I was first processed the day I got in, November 5th, one of the people said two of the jailers, one of them said to the other, "Oh, it's very interesting that he's being jailed on November 5th." And the other one said, "It's probably being done on purpose." So clearly he was obviously on my side, but I try not to discuss politics with the jailers.
And for the most part, your fellow incarcerated people were in for what kind of, were there other January 6th people, or were there white-collar crimes? What were these people in for?
There were white-collar crimes. There were 4 other January 6th defendants. There were people who maybe might have committed a violent act years ago, but they've been behaving for 10 or 15 years, so they've worked themselves down from a high or medium security to a low security. Half the prisoners, and this is probably one of the main things I learned in prison, completely unaware of, half the prisoners were what are called SOs, which stands for sex offenders. But before I got to prison, I thought a sex offender was somebody who lured a 6-year-old to a basement and then raped that 6-year-old. It turns out that the majority of sex offenders today are not that kind of sex offenders at all. These are people who actually just went on the internet and looked at pictures or videos that they should not have looked at. And some of these people did not even look at pictures of 6-year-olds. They looked at pictures of 16-year-olds. And for looking at pictures or videos of 16-year-olds, they're sent to prison for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. I think it's ridiculous because we are not living in a Puritan society. You know, you could commit adultery 100 times, break up 100 marriages, 100 families, cause mass misery to hundreds of children in the process, and you will not spend a single day in jail, even though adultery, by the way, is still illegal in 15 states. But if you look at some videos of a 16-year-old girl or 16-year-old boy, the federal government will invoke the Commerce Clause and come after you. Meaning, if the state also has laws against this, but their laws are much more lenient. The federal government uses the Commerce Clause, interstate commerce. They claim, well, the computer, when you look at an image in New York, that image bounced off a server in Virginia, and therefore you have now committed interstate commerce, and therefore we, the federal government, therefore have jurisdiction over you, which is, of course, absurd, and they lock you up. And I don't understand that. I mean, a first-time criminal, people who have never done anything wrong in their entire lives, productive members of society, you're locking them up. When they get out of prison, they won't be able to get a normal job again. It just doesn't make any sense to me at all. I mean, all pornography is bad. I'm not justifying it from a moral standpoint, but it just seems to me from a legal standpoint, why we're throwing the book at these people over everyone else doesn't seem to make any sense to me anyways.
I didn't know that. So let's jump to your deliverance. At what point when did you realize that there was good news coming your way?
Well, the rumor was that Trump was going to pardon 1,000 people. So again, I wasn't sure. Now, there were roughly 1,500 of us who were arrested. So was I going to be part of the 1,000 or part of the 500 who were not pardoned? And I always tried to not celebrate before your eggs are hatched. So I was, look, thank God I got a very short sentence anyways. I was very lucky. There were people who got sentences of 3 years, 4 years. I only got 4 months. So worst comes to worst, I would have been in prison for another few weeks. Now, of course, I did not want to be under home arrest. I did not want to pay $10,000 in fines. But the alternative, had I not been pardoned, was not horrific. For other people, it was horrific. So yes. I knew that worst comes to worst either way. I was not one of the people who were going to be suffering a lot. But that day, people were saying, "Oh, you're going to be pardoned." I said, "Look, we'll see. We'll wait and see." And then someone told me,
who was saying to that? Fellow incarcerated people, or defendants, or jailers?
No. I had very few conversations with jailers. Fellow incarcerated people, there were TV rooms, people were watching TV. And then finally someone said, "You've been pardoned." I said, "No, I'm not sure." It's like, "What do you mean you're not sure? It says on the TV every single person has been pardoned except 14 whose sentences have been commuted." So when I saw that chyron on the TV screen, I knew that I indeed had been pardoned. And by the way, some people were very excited for me, more excited than even I was. There was one black guy who was jumping up and down, "Trump's the man, Trump's the man, you've been pardoned, you've been pardoned." So it's kind of nice.
And how quickly were you let out the door?
That night, actually. 1 o'clock in the morning, I was let out in short sleeves in 3-degree weather, because the prison authorities don't let you take any prison clothing with you. That includes your winter coat. And so I was let out in a T-shirt. Look, I mean, I'm very happy to be out, so I'm not going to complain, but it is a little strange that they would let you out in a T-shirt. So another January 6th person went out in shorts and slippers. 1:30 in the morning in 3-degree weather. But
Yeah, I'm
but
sure nobody said, keep me till the morning.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So not to be frivolous about this in any way at all, because although you're very philosophical about it, and you depict your experiences not as bad as many others, but the bottom line is it's a pretty horrendous ordeal. So could you compile quickly 3 pieces of advice for somebody who discovers that he's about to be sent into incarceration? What are 3 things that somebody should know?
That's a very good question.
I mean, there must have been things that shocked you and astounded you. You know, the body search. You sounded very philosophical about it, but that could be profoundly shocking for many people.
Yes, indeed. I would just try to say to take it easy, go with the flow, don't expect very much. I mean, when I was in prison, I would see people complaining about the food, complaining about this, complaining about that. And I'm thinking to myself, why? You're making life difficult for yourself for no good reason. Just don't expect a tremendous amount. There's going to be some very silliness there. For instance, on a foggy day, they think there's more of a risk of escape. So they will shut you down in your unit all day long. You can, except for mealtime, and so you're stuck in your unit, in your room all day long. Okay, it's not pleasant, but you can just, if you
Yeah.
don't expect very much,
And
you won't be very disappointed.
Elliot,
Inmates are very friendly for the most part because you're all kind of in the same boat. So they try to share
question I
advice
wanted
with
to
you.
ask you. And
Did we lose connection,
can
by
you
the way?
Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I wasn't sure if we lost connection. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. I was going to ask you something else. Was there anything that truly shocked you? Was there anything that made you think that if you were going to get politically involved in any area, this is something you would change about the prison system?
Most of the horrific stories I heard I heard about places that were not, not my prison, other prisons. I mean, in general, I do think the justice system in general, I think, does need reform in several areas. One is partially from my experience, but partially from other people's experiences also. It seems to me that if you're a child in school who's about to miss 20 minutes of recess for doing something wrong, you will have more of a hearing in front of your principal than someone does in front of a judge who's about to lose 10 years of his life. Because the rules of civil procedure are so exact, there are so many things you're not allowed to say when you're put on trial, that many people often feel like they haven't gotten a hearing. They weren't allowed to properly defend themselves because the judge will say, this piece of evidence is inadmissible, that piece of evidence is inadmissible, or they also scare you. They'll say, you could go to trial and risk getting 20 years in jail, or we'll do a plea deal with you and you'll have to agree to go to jail for 3 years. And the person feels like he really didn't do anything wrong, he's really innocent, but he doesn't want to risk going to jail for 20 years, so he'll accept a plea deal for 3 years. A lot of people feel railroaded. And look, it's possible some people feel railroaded because we live in the me generation, and everyone's self-centered, and everyone feels entitled. But if everyone, usually if you do something bad, you did something bad, and you admit, look, I was caught, I admit it. If so many people think they're railroaded, I think that's a problem with the system. And I really think people should get more of a hearing. I think people should be allowed to speak their mind more in court. More pieces of evidence should be, I think, admissible. I think juries should be allowed to ask questions of defendants because they're the ones actually judging you at the end. It shouldn't just be a contest between a defense lawyer, attorney, and prosecutor, neither of whom care about the truth. Both of them just want to win the case. The jury is really the only people who actually care about the truth. So they should have the opportunity to ask questions, I think. So there are things of that nature I think should be changed.
When you looked at your jury, when you were standing in court, did you feel that 12 of them or 8 of them or 3 of them or 1 of them or none of them could be seen as your peers?
No, but at the end, I didn't even go for a jury trial because it was going to be in D.C. So I accepted a plea deal and I pled guilty. So I actually didn't even come to that point at the end.
Got it. My guess is from what I know of you and your family and your life, you've probably never eaten non-kosher food in your life.
That's correct.
what happened there? At what point? At what point did you make it known that you wouldn't be able to eat the prison food?
The day I entered prison, I made it known, and there was a chaplain on premises, an Orthodox chaplain, full-time chaplain, and so immediately I was put on a kosher food diet, and they catered to that. We had meals from Meal Mart, and we had a separate line. It comes double wrapped in plastic, so it could be reheated. Some people, lest anyone feel jealous, I have it on the word of a fellow Jew who was not Orthodox, who was on the kosher diet and later on the non-kosher diet. He said the non-kosher diet is better, but so no one should feel jealous or anything. But I was on a separate kosher diet, and they do cater to kosher needs.
Gosh, what a nightmare! What a nightmare! Gosh, it's and listen, God bless Trump for doing the right thing with all those defendants and with you.
Indeed. At the end, I think his initial reaction to January 6th, the first few hours, was good, or even was fine or good, and his last reaction was good. In between, I took some objection, but yes, at the end he did the right thing. So yes, thank God for it, and he deserves tremendous credit, because there were many people who did not want him to do that.
I've spoken to many people who've had the terrible experience of being locked up, and this is my last question for you. The question is, in a biblical vision of a godly society, there is no prison, there is no lockup, there's no incarceration. All punishments will be delivered in one of three ways. Capital punishment, you're executed. Secondly, you pay, and you will pay, even if you have no money, then you will pay by working for a certain period of time. And lastly, by lashes, whipping. And during the colonial period, one of the complaints that American patriots had against the British was that they used to administer lashings. However, they violated the biblically mandated maximum.
Interesting.
So the maximum number in the Bible is 40 lashes. It's reduced to 39 in ancient Jewish wisdom. And Hackett Fisher, who's a historian and written, I believe, on Paul Revere and George Washington, I believe it was him who made the point that patriots were very upset that the British, they didn't mind, lashes are lashes, they were administered, they felt they earned it, fine, but they objected to the biblically mandated maximum being exceeded. At any rate, in my view, and again, I'm not in a position to talk. I have no authority as you do, but in my view, taking away a year or 2 years or 5 years or 6 months of a man's life is worse than lashes. Now, the lashes are painful. They leave scars that might be there forever. You might faint, and there would be a doctor on hand to make sure that you didn't suffer any permanent health hazard. But it's certainly going to be the most painful thing one has ever experienced. So my question to you, Elliot, is if you were going to be in that correctional facility, not for 4 months, but for a year, everything you experienced, but going on for a year, would you have accepted lashes in lieu of that? And if so, what is the maximum? At what point would you say, no, I'll take my year? Or, 5 lashes, 3, 2, 10? What would you do?
That's a very interesting question. I don't know if I would take lashes over a year in jail, but I certainly would take it over 5 years or 10 years in jail. And there's a book called In Defense of Flogging that I read in prison.
Yes, that is by, remind me who it's by.
Peter Moskos.
I'm so sorry I haven't read it. I remember when it came out, and I thought to myself, this is right up my alley. I believe this is right. It must be an interesting book.
It is interesting. He does not go into the history of flogging as much as I would have liked, but it is interesting, and much of what you just said now is echoed in the book. And he says, you know what? If you think flogging or caning is what he really wants, which is what they do in Singapore. If you think it's so inhumane and barbaric, why don't you give defendants a choice? After, let's say, he's been sentenced to 10 years in prison, why don't you then say to the defendant, okay, you could go to prison now for 10 years, or you could accept now either 10 lashes or 20 lashes, whatever the case may be. Give people an option, because you are 100% correct, if you don't mind me saying so, which is that...
I always like being told I'm correct. It's the other way that galls me.
Yes, okay. Well, you're stealing years away from a person's life. That is the main punishment that I saw in prison, because, again, my prison was a very, very lenient type prison. You did not suffer a lot in prison, but nonetheless, years are being wasted away from your life. Years are being stolen from your life, and there's no reason for it. If you've maybe raped a person or killed somebody, or a serial killer, and we have no choice, well, then you really should kill the person. But let's say you were even opposed to capital punishment. Okay, so we have no choice but to lock you up to make sure you don't kill someone else again. But if you're not a violent criminal, if you committed a white-collar offense, and you're no threat to anybody, why are you stealing years away from this person's life? Another book I read in prison is called From Jailer to Jailed, written by Bernie Kerik, who was the former New York City police commissioner.
Yes, I remember.
And he also says, I don't understand, these people are productive members of society. Put them under house arrest. Force them to teach in a community college. But why are you making them suffer? Why are you making their kids suffer? By the way, another reason why prison was not so bad for me, and why it's so bad perhaps for many other people, is that I am really, unfortunately, not married. But if you are married...
can we put the word yet in
Thank
there?
you.
Do you mind that, Elliot?
No, not at all. I would prefer that. Thank you very much. So I'm not yet married, so therefore I'm not abandoning a wife at home. I don't feel supremely guilty that my kids are being left at home without a father. So this really weighs on people when they're in prison. And Bernie Kerik said, why? You're not doing the families any favors. You're not doing the person any favor. You're not doing society any favor. These people are smart people. They're talented people. They're productive people. He doesn't, so either flog them, he doesn't say that, but either flog them, put them under house arrest, do something. Don't steal years away from their life.
Yes. But I'm shocked to hear you say that you would have accepted a year rather than a few lashes.
Because I don't know. When I was sent to jail, I was not doing anything supremely productive at that moment. I didn't have, and had I still been at the Jewish press.
What you're telling me, sadly, I'm very, very distressed to hear this, but what you're telling me is that Elliot's life didn't change that much.
Well, because my life was already in limbo for a year and a half. Prison was an improvement over what I experienced before that. The first few months after I was arrested, it was fine, but towards the end, it was actually really very frustrating. I just wanted to be over with already. By the way, someone else told me the same exact thing. He said when he was sentenced, he wasn't sentenced to a jail term. What he was given was an end date to his suffering. Because until you're sentenced, your life is completely on hold. It's just completely in limbo. It was very frustrating. So here I was told, okay, 4 months in prison. In those 4 months, I played sports for the first time in high school, every day an hour or two of sports. I read 52 books. I read many books that I would not have read had I not been in prison. I got a very good education in prison, and I would not have minded being there maybe another 4 months. I would have read another 52 books. That would have been 104 books. I mean, eventually I would have said, okay, I've done enough. I'm ready to go home now. But
did your mom visit you?
Every week, yes, and my sister every week. I saw my sister more often when I was in prison than I see her when I'm not in prison.
So I'm beginning to see your position here. I get it. And since then, you're out of prison now, and thank God your life is resuming. And you've got one of your books is over your right shoulder, isn't it? Movers and Shakers was one you did.
Yes, all 4 books behind me are books that I either wrote or edited. So it's 3 volumes of Movers and Shakers. One of the other books behind me is called Nuggets of Gold. I collected over 600 witty and wise quotes from Donald Trump on marriage, war, plastic straws, and 300 other topics. I also wrote a book called America First, in which I examined the worldview of America's most powerful Jewish congressman during World War II. Because this topic actually comes up nowadays all the time. His name was Saul Bloom. He was the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee during World War II. Very proud Jew, But he realized, look, we're in a world war right now, and America has millions of people under uniform, and they come first. And as much as I want to help the Jews in Europe, I will try to help them, but I will do nothing to undercut the American war effort. And nowadays we have so many people who don't really care about America. They care about themselves first. So it'll be blacks for Trump and women for Trump and Jews for Trump and Muslims for Trump. And there's no group called Americans for Trump. And if we're Americans, we're supposed to be putting America first. And nowadays, people criticize American Jews. They didn't do enough to save European Jewry. Who cares more about European Jewry? We or they? These people were their brothers and sisters, their parents, their cousins. Of course they cared about them a tremendous amount, but they also realized it's wartime. America's government's first priority is winning the war, and we understand that. And that's how every patriot should think. And unfortunately, nowadays, too many Americans of every single group do not think that way. They only think about the concerns of their narrow community first, and what's good or bad for America comes a distant second. And to me, that's a terrible attitude to have. Sorry for going so long on that. That's another one of my books called America First.
So for most of your professional career, you've been putting words down for pay. You've been crafting. You're a writer, and you've been doing it very effectively. What about all the people out there? And I know people like this who have a story to tell. In some cases, it might be a life story. In some cases, it might be a lesson or a few lessons. But there are people who are frustrated writers, people who'd like to write, don't have the faintest idea of how to go about doing that. What can they do? And I know you have something of an answer to that, and that you have designed and built something that makes it possible for people. But explain to me what you could do for me,
right?
If I wasn't a radio writer.
Understood. So I created I think what you're referring to is I created an online course called 10 Tips to Drastically Improve Your Writing. And it's a course designed specifically for conservatives. And it's 10 lessons in which I share 10 tips, which I use religiously in my writing. And incorporated in those 10 tips are several other minor tips that I bring in tangentially. But to answer your question directly, because the 10 tips don't necessarily cover precisely what you're saying, I think of it in this fashion. Start writing the way you would speak to your friend. Let's say you just went on an amazing trip this past weekend, and you're calling your friend and say, I had an amazing trip this weekend, and you would start telling your friend about the trip. Approach writing the same exact way. Just start writing the same way you would speak to your friend on the phone or your parents on the phone. Start writing. Even that as a first sentence is a wonderful first sentence. I had the most amazing time in Disney World last week. That's a great opening sentence, and you immediately start saying what you did in Disney World, where you went, the best highlights. Don't be scared of the blank page. Just dive right into it. Pretend you're speaking to your best friend.
Is that one of the tips?
It's not one of the tips, but I'm sharing it right now. I do raise it actually in the course, but that's not specifically one of the tips. Yeah. But it is a good tip.
How do people find the course?
They could just Google 10 tips and my name, Elliot Resnick. They also could find it on my website.
And Elliot is a very confusing name, but this one is L1T.
Correct. Thank you. And I also have a website called brennbooks.com. Brenn has two N's. Brenn means passion in German or Yiddish, or fire. So I believe that we should always have fire and passion for what we do. I even have on top of my website a quote from someone. A Hasidic Rebbe was once asked, if your house was on fire, what is the one thing you would save? And he answered, I would save the fire, because without fire, life is not worth living. So I called it Brenn Books. It's the name of my publishing company. It's the name of my website. And the course is available also on brennbooks.com.
Very nice. And give me another example or two of a tip that would help me overcome writer's block. I've written business emails. I write to my family every now and then on an email, but give me a tip or two that would actually make me realize that I could actually write something significant.
I think people are scared of writing, and needlessly so. It's not a scary endeavor. you can do it. If you're, look, it's not everyone perhaps could be a great writer. If when you have conversations with your friends, you see all your friends are walking away from you because they're bored to death, then you will be a bad writer. But if you have friends who listen to you, who find you engaging, then you could be a good writer, because all you need to do is translate your words onto the paper. And especially nowadays, the main style of writing is a very colloquial style. You do not have to write in a very fancy 17th century or 18th century style with very flowery language. It's actually, people actually prefer for you not to write that way. They prefer for you to write in a very down-to-earth style. So if you just write the way you speak, and if any of your friends find you interesting, you will be a good writer. Do not be scared of the page. And you do not have to be very fancy. Don't try to be fancy. Try to be very simple. Sometimes the best writing is the simplest sentences, short sentences, not fancy convoluted sentences. And people, one of my tips actually is to write active sentences rather than passive sentences.
Give me an example of what you mean.
So an active sentence is where the actor comes before the action. So he wrote the book. The actor is he, and the action is wrote. He wrote the book is an active sentence. A passive sentence would be the book was written by him, because the actor is him, but now he comes after the action, and therefore it's a passive sentence. And politicians actually love passive sentences, because in a passive sentence, you could actually leave out the actor entirely. So you could say, mistakes were made. Now, mistakes were made by whom? There's no actor there. An active sentence you would have to say, I made a mistake. And that's a much better sentence. But somehow passive sentences actually sound fancier to people, maybe because they don't write that way or they don't think that way, so it sounds fancier to people. So they'll say, mistakes were made, or, another example of why passive sentences are bad, and this is one of the examples I bring in my writing course. You could say, here's a passive sentence. Under socialism, private farms must be relinquished to the state. So it sounds like a very fancy sentence. But number one, it's passive, because the action is relinquished and the actor is not named, and if it was named, it would have to be at the end of the sentence. And to make it an active sentence, you would have to say, under socialism, citizens must relinquish their private farms to the state. So it's a much clearer sentence. And now it's actually a much more down-to-earth concrete sentence. It's not an amorphous sentence, and it sounds so beautiful. It's like in the air, in the ether, that private farms must be relinquished to the state. No, private citizens must relinquish the farm to the state. Flesh and blood people must actually give away their private property to the state. So that's an active sentence. And even though the passive sentence sounds fancier, it is actually not fancier. It is a worse sentence. It is less clear, less down to earth. And so therefore, again, don't worry about being fancy. One of my tips actually is not to be overly fancy. Just write the way you talk, and more often than not, you'll be fine.
If I wanted to embark on this, I can't imagine, like, for exercise, to practice, to see if I can write, what should I try and write?
I find that some of my best writing are my emails. And especially, it's not nice to say, but especially if I'm upset at somebody or I feel very passionate about something, I will write this email in which I have listed in 2 or 3 paragraphs exactly why I'm upset about X, Y, and Z. And then I read the email like, wow, my argument flows so nicely. I'm super clear on why I'm upset about X, Y, or Z. And I'm like, I'm not trying to praise myself, but I'll say to myself, wow, I really actually like what I just wrote. If you are very passionate about something, and if you believe in something very strongly, it will actually come out pretty clear most of the time. So just find a topic that you know a lot about, that you're very passionate about, and write about it. And if it's political writing, or if it's fiction, if it's you want to write a memorial to your sibling who unfortunately passed away, sit down and think to yourself, why do I love my brother? What about him did I love? And just start writing from the heart, and it will flow. And just do it. Don't be scared. I mean, just don't be scared of the blank page. Don't think you have to be anything terribly fancy. You have to be a Pulitzer Prize winner. Just start doing it. You'll be fine.
What is the course called?
10 tips to drastically improve your writing.
10 tips to drastically improve your writing. And how long should the course take me to go through?
It's 2 hours and 20 minutes worth of video. 10 videos.
Oh, it's broken up into digestible slices.
Yes, with many examples.
Terrific.
Yes, and exercises, etc.
Elliot, reluctantly, I have to bring us in for a landing just because of the clock. But you are a very engaging guest. Now, admittedly, you have a dramatic story to tell, even though you downplay it in a very engaging kind of a way. But the truth is that the horror of it, I think, reaches me, and I'm sure the listeners as well. So I'm very happy you're out of that. I'm very happy you can throw your energies into helping the rest of us learn to write as well as you do, and I hope that the course helps a lot of people. Writing is a really valuable tool for business. In other words, if you are looking to change jobs, or you're looking to find a job, you're starting a career, you're changing careers, spending a little time polishing up your writing abilities really, really valuable. It really makes the difference between moving ahead and staying where you are. One of many things that do, but it is one of the things that makes a difference. It's incredibly frustrating for an employer to receive written communications from somebody you're paying and for them to be rubbish.
Yes, I can imagine so. And by the way, I forgot to mention that for your listeners exclusively, I've created a coupon, Happy Warrior. If you write Happy Warrior in the
Happy
coupon,
Warrior, one word in the singular, Happy Warrior, and you get a discount. I love discounts.
25%. Yes.
Great. I love 25%. Wonderful.
My pleasure.
Elliot, so thank you very much indeed. Great talking with you.
Thank you kindly.
Don't be surprised if you are contacted by about 60 to 100 young women who couldn't care less about improving their writing, but they'd like to go out with you. And I would call that a big win.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate it. Yes, and by the way, I have personal coaching also one-on-one. If people don't want to take the course and just want to have one-on-one coaching, I have that available at the same website.
I thought you would be able to do that. Yeah, that makes sense. Great. Fantastic.
But I really so much appreciate the opportunity you've been giving me here and inviting me on my show.
Always been a pleasure talking to you, and it's been at least 15 years that we've been talking.
Indeed. Yes, thank you. I really appreciate it.
God bless. Lots of success in all what I would call your 5 F's, Elliot: family, finance, friendships, faith, and physical fitness.
Beautiful. Thank you so very much. I really appreciate it.
All right,
you as well.
Talk soon.
Thank you kindly. Yes. Bye-bye.
I do hope you enjoyed that and found it as interesting as I did. If you are a member of the Happy Warrior community, you'll find it very easy on your special private website to let me know what you thought. And if you have any questions that you'd like me to forward to Elliot, please go ahead and let me know. Again, on the website, I will see your email and I will go ahead and forward the question to Elliot. He's proven to be very good with responses as well, so don't hesitate for that. And I think that, as reluctant as I am to bid you farewell, I have to indeed do that. The clock ticks on, and we've arrived at the end of this episode of the Rabbi Daniel Lapin Show. So thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for visiting the website. Thank you for subscribing to the show. And until next week, I want to wish you a fantastic week of progress and growth in your 5 F's, in your family, in your faith, your finances, your friendships, and your fitness. I'm Rabbi Daniel Lapin. God bless.